Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rails Common Ground. I'm Malva Kajali, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a very special conversation on the contentious and continuing history of the 19th Amendment in this country. Here with us today is multidisciplinary visual artist Elena del Rivero, civil rights leader and director of the ACLU of Louisiana, Alanah Odoms, and scholar and director of the Amistad Research Center, Tucina Olidge. They will be in dialogue with the phenomenal Andrea Anderson, who, when she is not curating brilliant panels such as this one, is the director and chief curator of the Rivers Institute for Contemporary Art and Thought in New Orleans. Finally, we will close with a listening session featuring a poem and sound collaboration by Laura Millen and Nathan Davis to close today's program. So looking forward to that. I also feel it's important to note that we started this series Common Ground back in August, looking forward to the election and with the goal of mobilizing our daily actions to radically reimagine our democracy. So to me, it feels extremely appropriate to be reconvening together today to share notes across disciplines on the storied history of the American vote and looking forward to our next moves. To begin, I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation, the traditional owners of the unceded land and waters on which we stand. The Brooklyn Rail also recognizes the illegal annexation of Republic of Artsakh as a grave injustice, both locally and in the international community, and we stand in support of the Armenian people and the global Armenian diaspora. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail would like to honor the lives of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAtee, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, Toyin Solau, Walter Wallace Jr., and countless others we have lost to white supremacy and police violence in this country. And we also would like to acknowledge that justice will come from the streets, from the nation demanding accountability and refusing to move on until Black Lives Matter in the eyes of the state. Before I introduce our illustrious panelists, I'd like to invite you to join us for a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And now to introduce our host, Andrea Anderson serves as founding director and chief curator of Rivers Institute for Contemporary Art and Thought, a multi-platform organization based in New Orleans. As a writer and curator, she's organized internationally touring exhibitions, and she also co-edits a series of artists' books together with Siglio Press, including Adam Pendleton, Becoming Imperceptible, Cecilia Vicuna, About to Happen, and Hinge Pictures, 8 Women Artists Occupy the Third Dimension. She also most recently co-edited Sanford Bigger's Code Switch with Antonio Sergio Bessa, which I am really looking forward to reading, and which accompanies the eponymous exhibition currently on view at the Bronx Museum, and which will be traveling in the spring to the California African American Museum in Los Angeles. She will be joined by Cara Olidge, who is a PhD scholar, arts and education administrator, and the former deputy director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Prior to joining the Schomburg in 2012, Olidge was the director of the Hetrick Martin Institute, a nonprofit organization serving lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth in Newark. Her scholarly work focuses on the intersection of art, critical cosmopolitanism, and community activism, and she also heads the amazing Amistad Center. She will be joined by Alanah Odoms, who is a civil rights leader, mother, and a professional and spiritual support to countless activists across Louisiana and beyond. As the first Black woman to lead the ACLU of Louisiana in its rich 65-year history, she has answered the call to defend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights by challenging systemic racism and gender injustice, vestiges of slavery displayed most prominently in Louisiana's epidemic of mass incarceration, immigrant detention and deportation, as well as the racist policing across the state. And finally, Elena del Rivero is a multidisciplinary artist known for her works on paper and painting, as well as sculpture, installation, and performance. A great source of inspiration for her work is everyday life and experiences and symbolic meaning, especially double entendre. She welcomes improvisation and spontaneity into her works and practice, allowing her projects to evolve and grow with time, and has had numerous solo exhibitions at institutions and galleries, such as the Navs Matadora in Madrid, the Travesia Cuatro in Guadalajara, a new museum right here in New York, and countless others. Her works are in the public collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, the Blanton Museum in Austin, Yale University Art Gallery, and the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. She lives and works between Spain and New York. Without further ado, Andrea, passing the mic over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to come together today in conversation the week after our historic elections in the United States, which I would like to say very clearly have given way to our next president-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, leaving only 2 congressional races in Georgia still yet to shape the balance of power in our federal government. I know this presidential race has been called, but not yet certified by all states until December 8th. We are here today for this conversation because this election provides more clarity, I think, about the heavy lifting ahead. This conversation began in the partnership between Amistad Research Center and Rivers Institute for Contemporary Art and Thought, both based in New Orleans. And this partnership is based in the shared investment in form and function of material history, in the making of contemporary art and understanding. And I think everyone participating here today in this conversation holds a commitment to thinking about art in relationship to social activism. And I'd like to organize this notion today around a question, and that question has to do with the moment when formal activism becomes social activism, and also a subsequent question about whether the latter is not always inherent in the former. I think thinking about social and formal activism, I cannot think of 2 projects that better shape or complicate those questions than the work of Elena del Rivero and Laura Millen. And so we'll have the opportunity to look at that work today and do that closely. But before we see and listen and begin to talk about these projects, I'm really glad to be joined by Tucina Olidge, Executive Director of Amistad Research Center, and Alanah Odoms, Executive Director of the ACLU of Louisiana. To begin, Kara, we are here discussing 2 projects realized through our partnership. Elena del Rivero Home Address, which figures now on the campuses of Tulane and Xavier Universities here in New Orleans, and Register, a commissioned poem by Laura Millen, voiced by Laura Millen, Rodrigo Toscano, Ronaldo V. Wilson, and Terry Whittick, and composed and arranged by Nathan Davis. Most of our collaborations begin in Amistad's archive, where artists presenting through Rivers begin deep research in the material history housed at Amistad. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit just simply about this archive and the breadth and depth of its holdings.
Certainly, and thank you for having me today. Thank you, Brooklyn Rail, and to the esteemed guest and Andrea. Just to give you a history of the Amistad Research Center, we were founded in 1966 by the American Missionary Association. Now, the American Missionary Association has a deep-rooted history in with abolitionists. That's where it starts. It starts with the Amistad case of 1839, where 53 Africans were abducted and actually sold into slavery in response to the violation of international law at the time. And interestingly enough, they were able to secure their freedom by working with abolitionists in America. And this case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. So I always tell people that when they see our logo, it is a slave ship. However, we are not about the story of slavery because they fought for their freedom and they were never, into the slave system. However, we like to look at our institution, this archive, as one rooted in freedom. It's rooted in freedom and social justice. So all of our materials and all of the narratives that we have are actually rooted in this idea of liberation and liberation movement. So it starts with the Amistad case. It moves into the American history in the South, slavery in Louisiana, in addition to the Reconstruction period, and then post-Jim Crow into the contemporary civil rights movement. And so we have a very deep and wide archive. It also contains the histories of liberation movements in Africa, particularly to the ACOA movement in South Africa. In addition to, we have collections from Vietnam. Our collections extend to the Appalachian Mountains and all the way to the West Coast of the United States as we deal with Latinx communities. And so it's a very deep archive. It's very expansive. We also have a fine art collection. And our fine art collection really chronicles and parallels the same conversation of how freedom is understood through these really wonderful visual narratives that we have. So it starts with French and African American art, uh, primarily focused on the 20th century masters that were dealing with the two-ness of identity with African Americans, actually looking at their relationship with America and also this geographical disrupt with Africa, but also retaining those cultural retentions that they have in the art that they produce. So this is who we are. We're very happy to be a part of these projects. It meets our mission, and our mission is actually to preserve and provide public access to these histories, what we consider ethnic histories and race relations within the diaspora. So I think that kind of answers it, Andrea.
It does. It begins, Kara. Thank you. And I want to say that about a month before the election, Kara, Alanah, and I we had an opportunity to sit down together, and we were having lunch and talking about these projects, and also recognizing that the work that we were realizing would need to become signs for a different kind of action on the heels. That we were, after the election results came in, we would have a lot more clarity about what exactly was the work at hand. Of course, when we met, I believe we were in the middle of, I think Justice Barrett had not yet been appointed to the court. We in Louisiana are particularly watching as we just ushered in new amendment to our Constitution, which Alanah, you can probably speak to, may very well find its way into bigger conversations around Roe v. Wade. But what we knew was that this was the beginning of a conversation, and it was not the resolution of a project, though the art had been installed and the work had been presented. So I would love first, perhaps to back up to, there were some images that were just shown, Kara, while you were speaking. And that's a project that you and Alanah worked on together. Alanah, do you want to talk a little bit about what we were looking at?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to the Brooklyn Rail. Thank you, Malvika, Kara, Andrea, and Elena for your incredible work. Yes, this is our Justice Can't Wait exhibit. And I just want to take a moment to say, art and activism have a incredible nexus. And I was privileged when I first became executive director of the ACLU about 2.5 years ago to have the privilege and honor to meet Kara and to learn about the incredible way that they were using their platform to have conversations. They deem them conversations in color, but to provide the hue, the texture, and the nuance of the ways in which social justice interact with both historical archive and also modern day art. And I thought that was breathtaking and empowering. And one of the things that I want to say that I think is beautiful about the way this conversation came together is that it's deeply rooted in women sponsoring, mentoring, and providing opportunities for other women. And I think that's one of the things that I'm so grateful for about my relationship with Kara. I think it is a beautiful lineage that flows, I think, absolutely from the women's suffrage movement. And I'll say that coming together, identifying synergies and ways that we can support one another among Black women and, of course, among white women and broader communities of women, intersectional women, is not necessarily the linear expression of the way the women's suffrage movement came about, because we know there were There was a great deal of division within that movement, but I think it does show the arc of the movement. And so this particular exhibit, Justice Can't Wait, is really seminal to the fundamental docket of work that the ACLU works on, but it also helps us ground ourselves in our history, because our organization is 65 years old at the state level. It's 100 years old at the national level. And I think necessarily it's really incumbent upon leaders, especially folks who are doing social justice work today, to help ground our members, supporters, friends, allies, and also folks on the other side in a deep understanding of our history. And I think fundamentally, I think that's what is lacking in our American consciousness, is a real full, unadulterated and deep view of our history, the darkest aspects of our history, those aspects that are delineative of our lesser angels, if you will, the ways in which struggle and oppression defined us, and frankly, the ways in which discrimination, fear, and hatred really were the metaphors, if you will, of Black life in the United States. And so this exhibit seeks to do two things. One, it seeks to ground us in this difficult and complex history, but it also seeks to demonstrate the ways in which resistance and the broad humanity of Black people has and always will be a hallmark of the ways in which we've participated in this democracy. And it is also a way to show very clearly a line between the vestiges of slavery, which, as for folks know who are joining us perhaps internationally, to give a very brief history of the United States from 1619, which many Black scholars would argue is in fact the beginning of our nation's history. From then until 1865, we had 250 years, if you will, of chattel slavery, where African Americans or African descendants of Africans were owned and were chattel of white folks. And we saw then only the abolition of slavery in 1865. But as folks know, that was culminated with the 13th Amendment. But there were a series of amendments to our Constitution, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which are the predecessors to what we're going to be talking about today with women's suffrage, culminating in the right to vote for African American men, happening in 1870. But then the actual, the inability of our people to be able to realize the promises of those constitutional amendments until nearly a century later. And what we know is that even with voting rights being cemented and fermented into our Constitution and into our laws with the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act in 1965, we then saw an evolution of these same vestiges of slavery into a system of mass incarceration, which we're still presently dealing with today in Louisiana, but also across this country. And so while I think it's important to talk about the ways in which the South is unique, the ways in which, of course, the fight for civil rights was birthed here in the South, I think it's also important, especially for folks in the Northeast, folks listening from other parts of the country and around the world, perhaps, that slavery, mass incarceration, mass deportation and detention, these are pandemics, if you will, that the entire country is dealing with. And of course, there are ways in which there are nations that are dealing with this around the world. And so while I think these issues might be magnified and perhaps more on display in the South, this is a quest for freedom and liberation that everyone in this nation should be participating in. And this is a conversation for all of us to kind of lean in on and not sit back and think, there's something peculiarly dangerous going on in the South. This is something that we've all got to kind of link arms with, face, and decide who we want to be with this next presidential administration, how we want to treat the most vulnerable among us, how we want to treat women, how we want to treat our children, and how we want to get along in terms of creating the opportunity for dynamic movements for liberation for all of us.
I want to take this moment to just put a little bit of pressure on this idea about the local registration of what you're talking about, and the way that it plays out on a national and global level. Alanah, thank you. I don't think I can thank you enough for the work that you do here in this community, where we are particularly aware of and sensitive to the threats to voting rights, to women's rights on a very daily basis. I wonder if we could just take a moment as context, because I think one of, as we move into Elena's practice, I want to say that Elena's work is entirely dependent on the context in which her work figures, and it is constantly both rehearsing but also rhyming with all kinds of other metaphors in history, depending on where her monstrous towels are hung. And so I'd like to pause here and ask you, because I think you can speak to it better than perhaps anyone here today, to talk about the amendment that was passed, the First Amendment that was passed as part of this last election, with specific regard to abortion rights here in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we had an amendment on the ballot this presidential election in the state of Louisiana to amend our Constitution to provide no state funding for a woman's right to an abortion, and to eliminate any state right to abortion.
Mm-hmm. Wait, I think we Alanah, you may be frozen here for a moment.
Oh, sorry. I hope I'm coming back.
Yes, you are back, and your statement was clear also.
Okay.
And so, it's for me, as a woman living in Louisiana, it's very difficult to separate this election outcome, where many in New Orleans had encouraging signs around that said the big nope in advance of this election. But as it turned out, this amendment passed without question here in Louisiana. This, of course, was anticipated. Just before this election, we had the appointment of a new justice to the court, born and raised here in New Orleans, Louisiana, went to school here locally, who may very well be a deciding justice on a future case that may test the strength and endurance of Roe v. Wade. And I wonder, Alanah, again, if I can lean on you to put this in a little bit of historical context about what we might expect in terms of future cases before the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. So we just want to be clear that this amendment, while it changed the state constitution, obviously because of our laws of supremacy, as long as Roe v. Wade remains on the books, a woman's right to choose is still protected in the state of Louisiana. However, there are laws called trap laws, which essentially seek to push abortion rights out of reach for women, predominantly women of color, Black women, poor women. And these laws look like admitting privileges laws. These laws look like permitting requirements for abortion care providers. And one of the things that is, I think, most complex, two things. One, I don't think voters understood the constitutional amendment, because I think the way in which they are presented is so vague and so complex that I think even a lawyer or someone with a great amount of education would still, within a minute or two of having to go in and see this language blind, might not understand it. So that's one problem, access.
I think it's worth noting there the double negation in the language, very specifically in the writing of this amendment, which the rhetorical maneuvers associated with this, again, they can't be disassociated even from Elena del Rivero's work, because how we shape and frame language in testimonies of liberation are really central. So I just wanted to speak to the double negation.
Absolutely. And it's yet another way, like we may not have poll taxes or literacy tests or other blatant ways to reduce or frustrate the right to vote if we do this mental gymnastics with the language and we create an inopportunity for people to be able to understand what they're voting for, that is in fact something akin to a modern day literacy test. So yes, but what I think is also key is that we've got to keep our eye really focused on these trap laws that seek to push healthcare, which abortion care is, to put healthcare out of reach for women. And this is something that, you know, Amendment 1 is really an expression of what's been happening all across the country in terms of an assault on women's rights to choose. There were, I don't know, 10 or 12 states that had abortion bans that were passed at various different levels in different weeks. Abortion bans are the clear and obvious danger, but let's also take a step back and look at the ways in which these trap laws operate to push care out of reach. And I think while we are focused on Roe v. Wade, we must be focused on Roe v. Wade. We also have to be walking parallel paths, and we have to be beating back these seemingly lesser nefarious laws that will operate in essentially to close abortion clinics and push care out of reach.
Yes, thank you, Alanah, for this kind of context in which we hold this larger conversation today. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome Elena Darivero into our exchange. Elena, you have described your work before, and lately, as I've been thinking about it, it's hard for me to think about this phrase apart from thinking about the making of democracy more broadly, but you've described your practice as anonymous, repetitive acts of creation and repair. And this is a description that I think you have applied both to a fine art practice, but also that can be also easily understood in terms of domestic labor. And so we're here today, and this conversation is somewhat occasioned by what you have called your monstrous towels. Monstrous, I think, both in size, but also in the complex histories that they point to. As Alanah was talking earlier, the 19th Amendment did not assure all women the right to vote. And we are, all of your, as you can see just behind you, you have one of your works hung, and you can see the registration of the stain. When I first unfurled one of your flags for installation here in New Orleans, my daughter was beside me and she said, "Oh, it has a stain on it." And I said, "I know, don't worry. It's there for a good reason." And so I'd like you to talk a little bit about this larger project. We play a small role in a larger project, Elena del Rivero Home Address, which is designed and imagined as 19 flags that will suspend across the United States in different contexts, different places, participating thereby in different histories, in commemoration of this centennial of the 19th Amendment, but also as a call to future work. This is a project for which you received the Guggenheim Award. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit about releasing this work into the world at this particular moment in time.
Thank you, Andrea, for your help and for helping with this project so much, I have to say first. For me, it's very important to put this work out precisely this year, the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. I started to think about all these things, back in 2017, I started to think about my dish towels, the monstrosity of my dish towels. I work with what it is at hand, but I wanted to go a step farther away, from that, so that my work, even though it is mine, was part of the community. I didn't know how to do this or how to evolve from the personal, the studio, into the arena of the public. And finally, I came with this idea that my dish towels were going to be translated into flags, like the American flag, but it was going to be a simple dish towel that everybody relates to, because it relates to home and especially the kitchen. So I was taking the kitchen as the political place par excellence where everything happens. Indeed, everybody discusses things in the kitchen. So by translating my paintings into these nylon dish towels that were going to be displayed in gardens, in in universities, everybody was going to relate, hopefully, the idea of home to the idea of that something was happening there. I wanted to click a metaphor,
Mm-hmm.
the metaphor of how the private becomes public, to entice these questions about people passing by a simple dish towel with stains, dirty, because my idea also from the very beginning was modern abstraction. What is first? The modernist abstraction, or the tea towel from the kitchen, or how we use canvas to paint and how we use canvas to clean the kitchen. And if you spread that towel after cleaning your kitchen, it becomes a painting. So all those things were coming into my mind, how to put all these things together. I was alone. I applied to the Guggenheim with this project, and I got it. Everybody thought I was a bit crazy, but I got it. And then came the idea of how to put it into the world. I met John Tyson. I explained what I wanted to do. And the two of us, without anyone, created the project by talking to people. And of course, I had an angel coming to me, and that angel was Andrea. And she just started to talk to me. We talked for a long time. I remember when she first came to visit my studio in New Orleans, when I was there at the residency. And one day someone told me, Andrea Anderson wants to come and visit you. I said, well, that's wonderful.
It's at the Joan Mitchell Foundation Center here.
Thank you. And so she came and we started to talk about all these things I were doing with photographing post-Katrina and introducing my dish towels into everything that I was seeing there. I had a lovely Mohammed, a person that helped me, that I found on the streets of New Orleans. Everybody thought that that was not safe, but this guy was amazing. He was a musician. He took me everywhere. And one day he said to me, Elena, there is a place that locals here called the end of the world. And I say, Mohammed, take me there. So, so he took me there, and I introduced my dish towels into the swamps, and I brought them back to the residency just days before Andrea came to visit. And I say, yes, I'm playing with dish towels. I'm playing with all these things that you see around. I had collected millions of things in the wall number 4. I went there with excavating and getting things. All this time, Mohammed was waiting for me. He was so lovely. Then I will take him with the money from the foundation for lunch and dinner, and he would take me to music places. So I was the happiest woman in New Orleans, to be the truth. There, I met Andrea, and Andrea has followed me all the way with this project. And now we see the light. It is in New Orleans, in 2 universities. Next month is going to Tampa, Florida. Another dish towel is going to fly there. In the beginning of January is going to Idaho, all the way to Idaho. So,
Elena, I pause here to look at, we're looking at one image just now, and maybe we can also click over to see the work that as it's hung at Tulane and at Xavier. Can you show those images? So we have here is at Amistad Research Center, here is at Xavier.
Andrea, oh, that is amazing. Oh my God, it's like home is conquering.
And the last image here, if we go back, one was also at Amistad. So these works read in a number of different ways, Elena. Of course, you've been just speaking a little bit about their daily pedestrian use as dish towels in the kitchen and the history of domestic labor, but they also, particularly when they are installed outside at these outsized scales, they also have a different participation in the conversation around nationalism and traditional flags. It is, as we have led up to this election, these works were installed a couple of weeks before the election. During that time, while we were installing these works, they were twice weathered, delayed, and then suffered through hurricanes here in New Orleans, and which I think is very much by design, frankly, that these works live through the conditions and the very specific conditions that impact our democracy. For those of us who live here in New Orleans, we know that the hurricane that hit New Orleans just prior to the storm also took out electricity for most of the city. And I think for so many of us, the resounding thought was on that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, as we led up to a Tuesday election, was because our state government had no alternate plans for reinstalling and restoring the electricity to many polling sites across New Orleans. And most people did not have power again until the Monday before the election. So I just think, thinking about the conditions to which your flags are subjected is also a registration of the conditions to which participants in democracy are subjected, and they weather over the course, and they come stained and they gain new ones along the way. But it is impossible to look at these flags and not also understand a kind of history of patriotic signs. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you imagine, of course, these are installed on 2 university campuses here in New Orleans. For many, this was, and Kara and I spoke a lot about this together with Alanah, for many that this election for that student body was the first presidential election that they would have the opportunity to participate in. How do you imagine these kind of various publics reading this work in the absence of additional information? When you look on high, and I've been having some wonderful conversations with another colleague of ours, David Robinson Morris at Xavier University, and Ron Bichet, who helped to install this work on the campus of Xavier, about the number of students who were stopping and pausing and talking and looking at it and trying to figure out, what is this thing that's just come up a week, 2 weeks before national election? How do you imagine the conversations that might unfold there?
Well, for me, thank you, Andrea. This is a very interesting question. For me, really, the most important thing will be to raise questions about the rise and fall of symbols of power. Mm-hmm. And start very important, and start conversations that really matter people, how people are suffering, these flags have stains. They are stains from the kitchen, but some people have interpreted them as blood. And I thought, good, we could start a conversation about that too, because the kitchen was the female grid for years, And even though we are celebrating this year the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, I have to stress, and I always do, not all women got the same right. Women of color in the South did not get the same rights. And that is a very interesting conversation for me. If these tea towels or these dish towels could raise that symbols of power, that we had over us, and we could start a real conversation of how we women, white women, have to acknowledge that it was not the same for everyone. So this is for me, living in the United States for 32 years, a very important part of my project because to me it's a public project. It also deals with civil rights. All those ingredients are very important. It's not just art for art's sake. I'm not interested if other conversations are not part of the game. So if, to answer your question, it will be just the rise and fall of symbol of powers. Very important.
Thank you so much, Elena. I want to switch here. We're gonna take turns with our screen shares. We have a lot of things we want to share, but I'm going to turn us to another work that we realized in coordination with this project. So if you can bear with me one moment. Do you all see what I see?
Andrea, if it's okay, could you try scrolling up or down?
Yeah.
Right now we're seeing the search bar only.
Oh, wow. I am fully, that is very curious. Okay.
I also wonder, maybe we could restart the screen share as like a full desktop.
Yeah, I can try that as well.
Okay, amazing.
I
feel like these are the pleasures and like titillating privileges of live broadcast.
Yeah, thank you all for suffering this.
While Andrea's navigating, I might just say a word about Elena's comment about structures of power. And also your comment, Andrea, just about the struggles that we were still enduring this leading up to the election. I really think, here in Louisiana, we were involved in a very lengthy, protracted fight for folks to be able to vote by mail. If you can imagine, there are many states where voting by mail is the preferred and sole form of voting. And there are very, very few states. We're one of very few states in the nation that does not allow exemptions for vote by mail. And so that was an ongoing fight. And it was something that, especially in the course of a pandemic, you would imagine would be particularly offensive for older folks, COVID vulnerable folks, people who are caring for someone who is ill. And so, there's still so many struggles that are inherent in this right to secure the vote for everyone. And I think that Elena's exhibition and her work with the stains is really just kind of demonstrative of this ongoing struggle that, while we have so many self-describers in this nation, of a nation of the free, of equality and fairness for all and for justice, those are self-descriptions, but the more accurate reflection is what Elena has presented to us, which is we are indeed beautiful, but we also have our blemishes and our stains.
And I bet you have transitioned so well for me, Alanah, because I want to be thinking a little bit about, and I take this opportunity to share a publication that we realized in coordination with Elena del Rivero, Home Address. And so this is a work that we did together with John Tyson. John, of course, has been thinking about supporting and writing about your work for a very long time. So we were really fortunate to be able to work together with him on this. And this project is actually derived from a very long form academic essay, which I have no doubt will be coming out in a scholarly journal near you soon. But we had the opportunity to take from this work and realize a new project that kind of shaped the history of this work through excerpted and fragmented pieces. And I think that alone was really important to us to think about the pieces of your practice and the way that these works come together, because this is a kind of registration of a kind of fragmented American history. And so I share this right now, but also to talk a little bit and to look a little bit at some of these works that we were able to show in this context. the way that this publication was organized was in large measure to realize a massive indexing of your practice. And it wasn't something that we really realized we were doing until we were well halfway through it, so to speak. But as we move through this this publication, there are highlighted words on every card. And those words, when you click on them, they point to another work, right? A visual work that's in the background. But they also have the function of highlighting for the reader some of the most essential elements of your practice. If one were to index your practice, they would find a lot of, they would come back to these same questions, these same terminology, these same elements again and again. And so I bring this as a way of kind of closing our conversation to look at some of the spaces and some of the words and some of the terminology that really shapes and frames your practice as they become visible in this indexical publication. Words like healed and grid, that as you move on, spills and stains and tears and footprints and housework and paintings and textiles. These are the words that comprise your very vast and practice over many years that circles around on itself again and again. The final work in this is a quotation, which is the index of accidents. And I think, Alanah, this comes back to what you were just talking about. And I think one of the reasons I was so overjoyed for the opportunity to help share Elena Darivero's work in New Orleans together with Kara and Amistad and Xavier, and to communicate it together with the ACLU of Louisiana, was to really register, as your works do, this history of accidents and the histories of errors, and that those errors, not only do we acknowledge them, but they can also point the way forward and can be built into signs that are not signs so much of power, but of liberation. And so I'm so grateful to you for letting us see these works so demonstratively here in New Orleans over this season. They will remain up. They're not going anywhere because the election may, while most of the votes may have been counted already, the work ahead is just beginning. And so I take this moment to pivot. I will keep the screen share and thank Elena, and also turn our attentions to another work that we realized together, Amistad and Rivers, on the occasion of this election and in advance of this election. And so we'll pull back here to bring us to a very different work. And this is a work that was commissioned by it was a poetic commission of Laura Millen. She is a professor at MSU here in Louisiana, and she began this work by entering into the archives. And Kara, I wonder if you can speak a little bit here about the holdings at Amistad on voting rights. Oh, can you put on your audio? Great.
Yes, we have a very wonderful, archive, a collection of the civil rights movement. And, just want to make a note that, when people think about the civil rights movement, they primarily think of the 60s. But, this is a movement in terms of Black liberation in America that started as soon as slavery started. So when you think about the activism of the rights of Black people in the Americas and what we fought for, particularly in the South, it goes back to post-Reconstruction era with, the free men of color going to speak to Lincoln about the rights of African Americans on the heels of just ending the Civil War and fighting to retain those rights and actually, have positions in our governments and administrations. And so that created the Reconstruction period. And then when you look post Reconstruction period, you really start to look at the advancements that were being made through the efforts of people like A.P. Turo, that was working with the Legal Defense Fund, with the NAACP, very early, actually in the 40s, to really take on cases that would look at the disenfranchised, like blacks being, the disparities between blacks and whites in terms of education. Literacy, as Alanah talked about it, was a big part of this issue with creating these traps, as Alanah mentioned, to prevent African Americans from voting. And so we have those cases here. We looked at the movements with people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who's mentioned here, which is very beautiful works that even talks about her interior, and what she felt emotionally about dealing with these issues as a human being and trying to be recognized as a human being. So we have a really wonderful array of collections that speak to this. And what I really want to say about this when it comes to the 19th Amendment is that, we have to look at the long arc of history and realize that this is really a contemporary movement. When you think about the 19th Amendment being certified in 1920, it would take Black women who were part of this movement working along with white women and other ethnicities, to make this happen. They wouldn't get this right until 45 years later in 1965. And when it comes to what we consider brown speaking folks, or what the nation considered language ethnicities, what they consider language ethnicities would be Latino and other non-English speaking communities, would not get it until 55 years later. They would not actually receive it until 1975, meaning that the United States really started to deal with the issue of access and language and how to educate communities on their rights to vote. So these are the kinds of documents that we have in our collection. And it's really great because through this project, we get to animate these collections. We were really excited about the idea of literary artists taking a deep dive in our collections and putting together a piece that really shows this movement, but then also to really remind people how the fragility of this movement, and what's really at stake today. So those are some of the things that we have in our archive.
I wanted to be able to, honestly, I wanted to be able to record Laura Mullen's voice in my last conversation with her. She is teaching, which is very important work during this hour. But her response to the experience of being able to work in the archives was so emotional and overwhelming. And for her to be able to handle these manuscripts that others had held and others had brought into the world and in the service of such extraordinary work was really a profound experience for her. And so I cannot speak for her experience. So I have chosen, as a way of introducing this work, together with Lauren, we decided that I would just read from her note that accompanies this, because I do think that it gives a kind of framework for this piece that we are about to listen to, that cannot be said better, or certainly not otherwise. So please bear with me. Register. Should it have been written forward, by Laura Mullen. Created using materials from the Amistad Research Center, Register picks up with awe the mission of the Voter Education Project of 1962-1963, providing notes, but providing voters with the knowledge and the will to register. Register, both noun and verb, evokes the necessary precondition of voting, but speaks also to the urgent necessity of being heard and seen. To register, to notice, also to make an impression, to be registered, recorded, are both key here. But also invoked is the range of a voice or instrument, specifically the particular range of tones which can be produced in the same way and with the same quality. It is Fannie Lou Hamer's narrative, I Tried to Register, which starts the text and provides its title. And it is Hamer's poignant and timely question, is this America? Which ends the work. The steady brilliance of Hamer, whose speeches are cited with the permission of her daughter, Jacqueline Hamer Flakes, at once heroic and human, shows the way forward as an eternal North Star. In the early days of the civil rights movement, registration required extraordinary bravery and trust, as well as hope. As a record of interviews with prospective voters notes, at the conclusion of one interview, a nervous respondent asked that her name be erased because of fear that her family would suffer because she had consented to the interview. To recall and respect the courageous voices in the archive, to honor the heroism of those who spoke when speaking was an enormous risk, made collage the work's necessary form. Those who paved the way for right we might now too easily take for granted must register, represent, and speak for themselves. Lyric interventions are kept to a minimum. As John O'Neill puts it in Despite Everything, July 1964, we need as much reality as we can get to prevent more tragedy. And the text of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is a touchstone, even as the included contemporary touches remind us that the act, weakened by the Supreme Court in 2013, remains a threatened and urgently necessary guardian of freedom. Included in Register are citations from literary tests from Alabama and Louisiana, those shameful documents used to disenfranchise citizens. For example, in the space below, write the word noise backwards and place a dot over what would be its second letter should it have been written forward. In the effort to write it forward now, Register puts those painful and absurd tests into juxtaposition with other documents, some of which have been subjected to various forms of gerrymandering, destabilizing representation. Because Register places exhortations and encouragements to vote in the context of encounters with the kinds of procedures and devices which have been used to suppress the vote, the audience may at some points find themselves struggling to rescue sense where it has been subjected to violent distortion. A necessary experience, a reminder that sense is not given, but emerges from shared struggle. In this work, I have assembled in Congress various sources united by their focus on voting rights with John O'Neill's words in mind. Writing on political subjects is all too pedestrian serious anyway. None of it, even the very best, is ever that true or precise. Yet it is always written like a manual for running a machine, or like a witness, or as if it came from God. Why not instead a dialogue, dream, stream of fancy, imaginary conversation, what you will, that can better reflect the truth, in that it does not falsely pretend to an order and knowledge it does not have? Why not, as O'Neill suggests, a text which exposes both its limitations and its complexity in order to invite participation in the production of a collective truth? This collage, montage, or mashup, voiced by Laura Mullen, Rodrigo Toscano, Ronaldo V. Wilson, and Terry Whittick, and composed, transformed by Nathan Davis, samples voices, tones, traces, and codes from history and the present to describe the struggle between efforts to register and activity meant to suppress the vote. Protest, DeRay McKesson said, is telling the truth in public. So is art. Register was a response to the longing for a fair and just and public truth in the context of our fraught history and the real of its violence. This score and the composition is an encouragement to that other public truth-telling which is the full participation in the civic life of the land, the understanding and exercise of the right to vote. That was an extraordinary honor to read from Laura's writing. And I will just note before we listen that below this, if you were to visit the website, you will find a note by Nathan Davis, who composed this soundscape of this work. And here is a link where you to click on it, where you can hear in its entirety Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony before the DNC Credentials Committee in 1964. And it is this work that Laura most heavily drew from, and it is a work worth listening to in its entirety. So I do flag that, and now I will bring attention to, I'll actually stop screen sharing, and we will take a listen now. I know it is the Brooklyn Rails tradition to end their conversations with a poem, and I am so honored that it could be this poem today.
Be it enacted, you cast a vote, like a net, like a line, like a statue, like a vessel. Be it enacted, I question me upside down, right period. You cast a mule was paraded through the streets of Huntsville bearing a sign that read, "I'm not registered because I'm a mule." What's your excuse? Your address. What did you do? Are you registered? Place a cross over the 10th letter of this line, a line under the first space in the sentence, and a circle around the last, but in the second line of this. Write down on the line provided on the line in the circle, engulfing another circle, what you read in the triangle below. Paris in the spring. Paris in the spring. In the third square below, write the second letter of the pass this book on to whoever takes your place. To me, because up over 1963 till August 2013, an abiding distrust to indicate or convey. Here are the melted glass shards. Here are the nails recovered from the bombing of the church. Voices go on saying, register, stay in line. Is democracy real? We have got to grab our comfortable shoes, put on our masks, pack a brown bag dinner, and maybe breakfast too, because we've got to be willing to stand in line all night if we have to. The long history of intimidation and violence. Has the following part of the Constitution changed? We, the people. 2. Has the following part of the Constitution changed? What has been changed? Can you interpret what has? Tell us your full name. Is it the duty of the IRS to pass legislation? To give welfare checks? Name one type of government, name another. Must in God we trust be placed on each coin laid cold on the eyelids of the draw 5 interlocking. Who pays members of Congress if the United States is party to a permit to body money for a poll tax? Is responsibility a duty, a speech, a failure? Name your address, serve the person charged who, and who is your employer? If the president does not wish, if the president refuses to, can you make a sign here? What is the saddest letter in the backwards word? Place a dot over and a reasonable interpretation. Make a tiny cross removed from conviction of bribery. Check the applicable definition for treaty. Is it 1, an agreement between nations? 2, a tax? 3, a written oration? Name the man. Who is that? What officer is designated? Can the state coin money to place on the eyes of those killed in the effort to gain and protect the right to name one area of authority, power given for the purpose of the legal tender? Can you be imprisoned for debt? Have you, in addition to becoming a U.S. citizen by birth, a person may become a citizen by choice? 1, immigration, naturalization, voting. Which of the parts above has been changed? Is democracy real? What's reasonable? What you are told to do in each statement, nothing more, nothing less. Be careful, as one wrong answer denotes failure of the. You have 10 words to complete this. Is this right on the line provided when you read the triangle below? Protest is telling the truth in public. To cast away a shadow. Actually issue 1. When we went up and asked those people who watched the polls just to see how many ballots I was getting through, the people in the area where I exist now was told to stand 50 feet away and watch through a concrete wall. No procedure. Through a concrete wall, no procedure. Through a concrete wall, procedure. No procedure shall be applied to deny or crush the right to. No person shall be denied the right to vote. No person shall be denied the right to vote for the failure to pay a poll tax fines. Write the word noise backwards to make the intended impression. Any challenge to a listing or eligibility shall be heard, shall be heard, shall be heard, shall be heard, shall be. Be sure to have a dime with you for a phone call. B. Vote for the enacted failure to pay a poll tax fines. Protest is telling the truth in public. What to do? We're saying this is the truth. We're saying we want to see is democracy real. Here's what to do if you're turned away, registered, square, right, the second letter of the fourth word. We're saying, are you still now that the laws will be enforced fairly? Is democracy for freedom of mind and action? 1, circle the first letter of the alphabet in this space below. Draw 3 circles, 1 inside, engulfed by the 2. Can we call this a free country where I am afraid to go to sleep in my own home? Free Check to see if you need an ID, and if so, which kind. Remember that most likely. Remember that most likely. Remember that most likely you. Remember that most likely you are. Remember that most likely you are legally. Remember that most likely you are legally allowed to vote. When all else fails, insist. You don't have to go alone. Questioning, challenging, photographing, videotaping. They should each have a book like this. Stay in line. 3.
A covered jurisdiction which wants to put an election change into effect
and temporary provisions to ban discrimination. C,
along with background information to the U.S. Justice Department. And B, and didn't get thrown out?
Pre-record the position.
C,
Is this America? 1. Above the letter X, make a small cross. Pull the lever, touch the lit button at the bottom of the screen.
Fight a lever.
Bzoop. Bzoop.
Pull the lever.
Count it. Do I bzoop?
Fight a lever.
Count the hanging chads.
Change the world.
Count the hanging.
Fight a lever.
Draw
Pull the lever.
Black
Fight a
and
lever.
bzoop.
Change
That
the world.
overlaps only its left.
If I have a lever,
Fight a lever. Pull the lever.
If I have a lever,
Fight a lever.
now with your
Change the
hand.
world.
If I have a lever, I have a lever. If I have a lever, now with your
Fight a lever.
hand.
Pull the lever.
If I have a lever,
Fight a
I
lever.
have a
Change the
lever.
world.
If I have a lever, now with your hand.
Call election protection. That's 866 our vote. Call predict the results. If threats or intimidation are getting shut out after waiting photographed, in line videotaped, overzealous ID checks, getting turned away without casting a ballot, a provisional
It
ballot,
is your right.
a challenge ballot,
It is your right to.
or affidavit ballot.
C'est ton droit de vote.
It is your right to.
È tuo diritto
It is
votare.
your right.
Este
It is
tuo
your right.
recht.
Rigged or stolen. It is your right.
Tu dobbiace.
Rigged or stolen. It is your right.
Toujours
Rigged or stolen. Spell backwards, forwards. You cast a vote like a shadow, like a stone. Register. Don't leave without our comfortable shoes, our masks, our brown bag dinner. Make sure you know the rules so you can be an advocate for yourself. To call, plead, speak, plead, summon, invite. To call, to speak, plead, summon, invite. To call, to speak, plead, summon, invite. To plead, summon, invite. To intercede for, vote, vote. Vote. In the space below, write the word noise in a blackened circle around the number or letter of this list of reminders about what you can do if you were turned away. The November election is so crucial. They stacked the blue drop boxes for our mail on trucks, sent out false information. To be careful, as one wrong answer denotes 3 small circles, one inside engulfed by the other. You have 10 minutes to spell backwards, packed,
No se
cracked,
encontrará
and
ni
hacked.
aplicará ningún procedimiento para
Do
negar
what
o
you were told
limitar
to
el
do.
derecho a votar.
Nothing more.
A nadie se le negará el
Nothing.
derecho de voto.
Now,
A ninguna persona se
4.
le negará
How
el
does
derecho a
Section
votar
5
por no
pre-clearance
pagar
work?
una multa de impuestos
A,
temporales.
a covered jurisdiction which wants to put an election change into effect submits the change along with background information to the U.S. Justice Department and B. And didn't this get thrown out to C? No person shall be denied the right to. D. No person shall be denied the right to vote. E. No person shall be. F. No person. G. All over the country there are those who are not registered and who generally fear penetrating to this level of routine exercise of free speech. The effort to vote requires such courage or disregard for consequences that not a single protest tried to register public. We're saying now with your hands, it's the truth you tried to hide. You know, to tell us we weren't supposed to talk about, and we refuse to let other teachers believe speaking what might beset by conflicting happen has no way changing, but do not know how cancer will. Others are registering, some others I heard in certainty their jobs. I don't know, I really don't know. If 1 or 2 go, they might attack, might be ganged up on, killed, but the sheriff told us who tried to register. One teacher says, I heard suggested This then was the Voting Rights Act as it was passed in 1965. As soon as it was passed, Bloody Selma March, let President Bloody Selma March, let President Selma March host a result to achieve. In the line we stay in, stand for, stand up for, blurred by the poison rewritten. If I have a lever, I have drawn a circle around 16. If I have a lever, I have a lever. If I
had a lever, I have a lever. With your hand, be it enacted. If I had a lever, I have a body. Now with your hand, be it enacted. You cast a vote like a net, like a line, like a statue, like a vessel, like a tree. You stay in as long as it takes. And if you fall, as Fannie Lou Hamer said, fall forward for freedom. We, the people, vote.
I question America. Is this America?
Now.
I will also only add that we only listened to half of the work. We picked up midway. I made a note in our chat just to let people know, but I really encourage you to hear all of Laura's piece, and it's available on the website. I think they sent the link, as well as the poem. The written form of the poem is also listed, is included there. So, thank you all for this opportunity to talk together today.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you for sharing Laura and Nathan's amazing soundscape and like auditory collage. I'm really excited. I feel like we have a number of quite diverse and interesting questions lined up from the audience. And the first will come from the fabulous Karen Little, who should be able to turn on your audio right now. Go right ahead.
Thank you for this fabulous conversation today. And yeah, I really kind of was quite moved by the audio because I was up at before dawn to go vote last week. So, but this question is directed more to Cara and Alanah, and it's about the actual writing in the electoral ballots. Can we form legal cases on the issue of language on the ballots? Is this possible?
Thank you, Karen, for that question. And it's actually something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, and I was excited to respond to you in the chat, and so I think I did. I also I've thought about it in the context of jury instructions as well. If you've ever served on a jury, you may have been equally intimidated as I was when I constructed the jury instructions, but also as a fellow juror when I was asked to read and understand them. I think we would have to think of some very creative legal strategies, perhaps equal protection claims in order to bring those cases in federal court. But I do think that we have to really look to the ways in which our substantive rights are diminished with these tricks and different strategies, and go at those in addition to, of course, protecting the seminal right itself. And I think that's a brilliant idea. And if you'd like to work on it with me, Karen, I welcome you to come and think through it with me, but I like it very much. And I think it would do a world of difference to really leveling the playing field for equal access for all, in terms of our voting rights, in terms of the way that we participate in juries, and of course, in terms of creating access for every citizen, despite wealth, socioeconomic background, educational background as well.
I'd just like to add with that is that one of the things that was very useful, and then John Lewis talks about this a lot, but for young people, there's a way that arts really, they play such a vital role to understanding language. One of the examples is the example that Andrea just, illustrated with how they are presenting Elena's work and highlighting those words, those key words that translate into different meanings. Well, during the civil rights movement, at least contemporary civil rights movement, they use graphic novels and graphic stories and comic books to explain this process to young people to get them involved. John Lewis remarks that that was the way he got involved, that he had read a comic book about the civil rights movement and what was at stake. And we actually have several here at the at Amistad in our archives. But I also think it's also things like John O'Neill, one of the artists that was mentioned in the poem and in the research, is that Free Southern Theater. They did a lot in communities, rural communities, urban communities, using how do we utilize the arts to translate this information to people. And I think that's what that's what Elena works really demonstrate is that, you know, not only symbolism, but starting those conversations and using the arts as a means to not only get people involved, but, you know, to educate. And so I think that is a way that Alanah and I have been talking about, you know, how do we get the legal world and the art world to come together around some of these issues, and how can we move this work forward? So
I want to jump in there just for a second to say that, you know, Kara, you remind me to remind others that Amistad Rivers has both over the course of this year has been working with John Jenkins, who is doing this work today in terms of using graphic novel and in coordination with the exhibition Separate Biggers that we recently organized. John Jenkins realized a really amazing graphic essay, and the animation of that is also on the Rivers website. And stay tuned because we're cooking up more things together with Kara and Amistad with John. So that work goes on.
very exciting work, very exciting.
Thank you all three of you so much. Our next question comes from our very own Charles Schultz. And I think is a bit more centered on kind of like arts and installation. So Charlie, take it away.
Thank you, Malvika. Thank you everyone for this really uplifting and fascinating conversation. Yeah, my question was sort of simple, but one of those simple questions that could open up into bigger places. And it was really just out of curiosity for Alanah del Rivero. How do you select where on the buildings is the ideal place for your tea towels?
Well, thank you for the question. It is a collaboration with the institutions. I'm looking for places, of course, but then I have to deal with what they have. You understand? So my most important thing is that they are as visible as possible, that they are in places where people will stop and think, what is that thing doing there? And create in them the idea of dreaming, thinking. I want with the work the possibility to dream about worlds and things. So the most visible they are, the better. For me, the best scenario would be the gardens, where people sit down with their children to eat over in the trees. I would love for these flies to fly and hang. But I'm very happy how it was installed in New York at the gallery where I had this exhibition. I am delighted to see them in New Orleans. They are fantastic. I like the place where it's going to go in Florida, in Tampa. Very happy because it is like a passage. People have to go through there and they will ask questions. Art, I think, is about making questions, sometimes without answers, but the question is the important thing. Make people think. So I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, I love thinking about the accessibility of the object as a preliminary starting point. I think accessibility is not something that occurs to a lot of artists right off the bat. And one of the things that was occurring to me was how important it must be for people to be able to see it and identify it. Because I feel like if it was at the top of a building, it might be harder to see, like, well, that's something different. That's a tea towel with a stain. So it has to be, you know what I mean? It has to be, there has to be this negotiation kind of between.
I like what you are saying, because it is this fight, because high and low art considered so, I think there is the key to it all. It is, well, I'm an artist. I have all these things in the back of my mind. I have spoken about modernism, so on and so forth. But then comes home, and then comes the tea towel. Everybody is able to relate to that. When I was talking before about the rise and fall of symbols of power, I was thinking always that I wish my tea towel to be a monument rather than a warrior, and to have this thing that gets destroyed, dirty, and it is something that everybody can relate to.
And may I add a couple of things about the process here in New Orleans that that feel relevant? We were, on behalf of Elena, I was on both grounds, both at Xavier and at Tulane, and looking for these sites in a city which has recently taken down a host of monuments, thinking about what it would mean to reintroduce something of kind of anti-monumentality. So when we were making these selections, I can say for Elena, they come in 3 sizes. And so Elena helped make those choices, these very, seem perfunctory, but they're really quite significant choices about what scale, for what size, for what particular site. And also we were really clear that we wanted them to hang differently. On one campus, we wanted them to be outstretched, speaking both more to kind of histories of painting, and on another, hang from a flagpole in a fairly traditional flag hanging kind of way. And so as Kara can attest at Tulane, it hangs right outside of Amistad in the front entrance, which faces Audubon Park in New Orleans, on a building with its own complicated history. And Kara, maybe you can speak to that. And then at Xavier, maybe you could speak to that right now.
Let's just say that the Tulane does have a complicated history in terms of racism and white supremacy. Tilton is the Tilton Hall, or Tilton, is a big part of that history, and so we were really excited and happy to kind of reframe this history with putting something that empowers women and also speaks unearthing those silent voices and that type of oppression. So I think that's the easiest way to say it without getting into a long, deep history. But just know that it's really steeped in white supremacy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the very specific sites for these flags bring on so many more points of resonance. And I want to just shout out here to Ron Bichet, the artist, who with tropical storm winds, we walked and drove all around Xavier. We were waiting for a storm. This was the storm before the storm. And we spent a lot of time circulating Xavier, trying to find a site that didn't have an outdoor classroom tent, and which most campuses are riddled with right now, where students could converge and see from many different vantage points. So he is really singularly responsible for installing that in between many different high wind experiences in New Orleans this fall.
Thank you so much, all. That's so inspiring how thoughtful every decision is along the way. Really grateful to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlie. And thank you, everyone. I'm going to jump in a little. Elena, I was really into your pieces specifically because they seem kind of like a counter flag, which I think you've all spoken to quite a bit. But I also feel like this is so relevant to the talk that we're going to have tomorrow, which is kind of quite explicitly about counter monuments, that in this moment where we're kind of deconstructing or feeling a little more anxiety or ambivalence towards like the nation, to have a counter flag that, doesn't represent the institution and its history, or doesn't represent the government or the state or, any of these things, but represents like the domestic, right? The domestic that is universal and it's quite intimate. I just think it's lovely.
Well, that is the idea behind anti-monumentalism. So, thank you.
I love it. I feel like I'm learning so much. I wanted to ask sort of a follow-up question to this last question. Charlie asked about how did you decide where to situate the flags? And I'm sort of wondering more broadly, as we've worked on this event, I've wondered, how did these collaborations between all of you and between institutions that kind of operate in different modes of intervention? So, represented here, we have sort of a scholarly institution, we have Tulane, we have curatorial with Rivers and with your gallery, we have legal and social justice with the ACLU of Louisiana. I'm wondering if you all could explain to me a little how you came together for the numerous collaborations that we're seeing today. And another question I'm having is that I've been wondering, is this like mass collaboration we've been seeing sort of emblematic or instructive in the sense of modeling sort of new forms of collaborating or organizing for the coming years? I know our publisher is very fond of speaking of community and community work as kind of like social sculpture. And to me, it seems like that is something that you are doing. So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how you all came together for these collaborations.
Andrea, for me?
Sure, I can start by
Sorry,
saying.
that was quite long.
Yeah, no, I will begin by just saying, God, I hope so. I hope it is the model for future presenting and organizing. This project is the result of long-form partnership, and I think that is what I'm most invested in sharing today, which is, Kara and Alanah have worked together for a long time. I feel very fortunate to have been welcomed into that collaboration and that history of their collaboration. Kara and I are working daily together. Rivers and Amistad has a long-term partnership that figures and shapes all of our projects together. In turn, I'm long-term partnered with California, Rivers is partnered with California African American Museum and a number of other organizations. And so the nature and the logic of Rivers is really about finding and building relationships over time and across sociogeographies. And it's really in the exchange of our knowledge and our talents and this work across communities that it becomes particularly relevant and powerful, I think. Certainly it allows us to do more ambitious things, and that's exciting, but it also changes what we're doing and how we learn from one another. And it feels, at least to me, and I will then, pass off to hear from Alanah and Kara and Elena, but to me, it feels entirely different from other kinds of partnerships I've been involved with in the past, which have historically and typically been one-off, kind of, great, we did this, we came together around this, and then we all go our separate ways. There's a totally different process associated with relationships that you're trying to foster for years and years to come. And it operates differently. It operates daily rather than, occasionally. But you also start to understand each other's labor in a really different way, what you're asking of others and how things come to fruition.
Well, I would like to say something about this project. Trying to put it together, I have talked to many people. The beauty of this project is that it is outside the commercial realm completely. It's really about community. And that is what I wanted. Everybody's collaborating. It's not about making money, not me, not the others. This is the beauty of this project. It's really important, I think, what we are doing. Of course, I've been with people and they were excited about the project and they wanted to make it commercial with a lot of money and bucks involved. And I rejected those projects because it is not what I wanted. And I was very clear about that. It would have been a commercial project about making the work of Elena make money for someone else. And this is not what it is. The beauty of this project, and Andrea and my dealer in New York have helped me a lot, and John Tyson, and everybody is working here for the project, for the community. I cannot think of a greater beauty. I mean, this is one of the most extraordinary things that have happened to me as an artist. And I am thankful to everybody that is collaborating, because it's about joy, it's about sharing, and we are getting things done together. So thank you. I can only say thank you, big thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And I can say that for me, I think it's a very Western concept to compartmentalize things. Um, for me, working with everyone here symbolizes to me what we should be doing. And I think we've done it historically. I mean, you know, we've been talking about and just drawing from the civil rights movement, but if you think about the civil rights movement, you know, there was an alignment between what was happening legally, what was happening in education, what was happening in the arts, right? The civil rights movement moved to its own soundtrack. It also had its own visual narratives. A lot of the artists that were making work in the 20th century in response to what was happening. And I think the thing about this is that that kind of alignment is what moves democracy forward. I mean, that kind of alignment moves the ideals of truth, beauty, and good forward. And I think we can't do it independent of each other. We have to be connected in this way. We have to keep having conversations about how we could bring communities together and how we can realize the greater good for everyone. And I think it takes all of these things to work together. And when we do it particularly well. I think even if you want to point to FDR's terms and with the Work Progress Administration and Rebuilding America, just as an example, with the Work Progress Administration, it was unearthing oral histories from people. It was putting arts and murals everywhere. It was building roads and highways, but it was also kind of changing the landscape in terms of how we understand nationalism, how we understand each other, and how do we understand, administrations that create the policies and procedures, and which we will live in a society together. So I think that this is a model, and I think it's a model that's really standing on the shoulders of other people who have done this. And I think the thing that we have to do is to keep doing it. And so that's maybe Alanah, you may have some comments or you want to share.
I love everything that everyone's shared thus far, and I will say that it feels to me like this project was an opportunity to ask folks, especially perhaps people who would not be at a table traditionally, to join that table, and also exploring this idea that Kira had spoken about with regard to ways of knowing. So Western ways of knowing. And I mean, traditionally, if you think about legal jurisprudence and the way that we, defer to, I think, academicians, or we defer to institutions that have very structured ways of presenting information. And, leading a social justice, civil rights, civil liberties organization, I think there are, I think there's a huge component of our identity that is that. But I think in order to really reach people, you've got to connect not just to their heads, but you've also got to connect to their hearts and their minds as well. And so we know the transformative power of art and music and all of these interdisciplinary ways, deep ways of knowing. And I think we each have, I think, learned by sitting at this table together, had the opportunity to receive these different ways of knowing and learning, and have been, I think, vulnerable and comfortable enough with one another to say the things that we don't know, and to learn and receive other things to kind of add to this, I think, beautiful way of developing ourselves as women and as leaders. So I really think it's definitely a model. I love this way that you've described it, Malvika, of social sculpture. That's so beautiful. And indeed it is, as a sculpture is, something that endures. And I'm hopeful that we can continue the work together.
Oh, I love that. Oh, go ahead. So sorry.
Thank everybody again, Malvika and Andrea and Alanah and Cara. I love the word amistad. Amistad is a beautiful word in Spanish too. I want to thank everybody, John Tyson, everybody that is helping me. But I cannot forget Eugenia Faria from the Eugenia Sucre from the Enrique Faria Gallery, that they are doing everything for me and helping me so much that I am very thankful to them, because they are in this project like community project as well. So thank you very much, everybody, for making this possible. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I just want to say also to the Rail, you know, this has been a conversation that has bridged very local politics with national politics. Elena is here from Spain. I think this is often what happens in New Orleans stays in New Orleans, right? Those of us who live here, we are we're usually not on the cover of the newspaper unless it's a Jazz Fest, Mardi Gras, or a calamity. And I think it is incredibly meaningful that the Rail tunes into the art and activism that is very alive, and the knowledge that is held here in New Orleans. And we're really grateful for you to bring this to a broader public. So thank you.
Oh my gosh, this is so sweet. I also want to second and third and fourth what everyone has said. This has been a brilliant panel, and I'm so excited. I hope this is the first of many conversations and collaborations. And yeah, I'd love to stay informed of your beautiful work. So I also want to take a moment. I would be remiss if I didn't highlight the beautiful Google exhibition, which is visible virtually, Justice Can't Wait, Oppression and Resistance, which sort of details slavery to mass incarceration in Louisiana, and is a beautiful fruit of this collaboration between the Amistad Research Center and ACLU of Louisiana. So that's been dropped in the chat. Worth a browse. Please join us again tomorrow for Monuments Now at the same time, when we will be joined by artists Xaviera Simmons, Jeffrey Gibson, and Paul Ramirez Jonas, whose sculptural and monumental works are currently on view in the Socrates Sculpture Park exhibition in Queens. They'll be in conversation with the curator of that project, Jess Wilcox, to discuss very similarly the role of monuments in society and to commemorate counter monuments and counter histories. That will close with a poetry reading from the writer and organizer Jive Poetic, who we've been trying to track down for weeks. So also worth a Friday visit. But thank you all so much. This has been so beautiful. And you should, one moment, I'm going to, settings are so tricky. I think you should be able, I'm going to invite you all to unmute your audio so we can all say goodbye. But thank you so much. This has been so beautiful. You're all so uniquely brilliant.
Right.
Thank you, Kara.
That's it. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.
Bueno, no lo mandas por ahí, pero igual.
Yeah. Well, this has been lovely. Maybe we should all break for lunch and for Elena dinner.
Thank you. Thank you. Such a great talk.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Care, everyone. Be safe.